Okay, so this is, the title suggests, a foray among possible words and quasi-word. First, a word on the title. I am not able to read my own, no, I minimized the images and then I had the, just a second, again. So I was saying 2 words on the title, so don't expect here like any important argument. This is a very short talk. The idea is quite simple, is to highlight, to explore the potentials of the phenomenological approach, of the transcendental phenomenological approach in the area of possible words, what we can also call possible words metaphysics, in some sense of the word metaphysics. My intention was, of course, to echo Jacob von Uexküll's famous book, A Foray into the Words of Animals and Humans, that's discuss animals' environments, and so a more extensive analysis, though, should highlight how Uexküll foray to ventures into a territory that can be explored phenomenologically under the title Possible Correlates of Consciousness. So in a sense, the reference is not completely idle and empty. Now, instead, the second proviso is that the term quasi-word that appears in the title is not used in the Husserlian sense of Fantasiewelt, imagined or imagination word, which is the one that Husserl uses in most cases. So a word that it's quasi, not because it's structurally different from ours, but because it's not the real one. I put it in the title as a word that enjoys a possible objectivation only to a limited degree, and therefore, to avoid confusion, I will avoid that term, and I will use either a semi-word, but also, as we will see in a kind of funny way, naked word or hollow word, which are more suitable for what I will talk about. Now, in order to exactly explore how phenomenology deals with these problems, I will begin instead to suggest just to compare it with the opposite approach, which is an objectivistic definition of word and possible word. And I'd like to introduce the phenomenological account of word and possible words by contrasting it with a paradigmatic case of objectivistic account that I take to be that of David Lewis. And here we have famous quotes that you find more or less everywhere. David Lewis' objectivistic definition of word and possible word. David Lewis says that a possible word has parts, namely possible individuals. Of course, it's not time here to explain what possible individuals are. If 2 things are parts of the same word, I call them word mates. A word is the mereological sum of all the possible individuals that are parts of it, and so are word mates of one another. It is a maximal sum. Anything that is word mate of any part of it is itself a part. So nice mereological definition of how to build up a word starting from a particular. And obviously, the point is what makes 2 things word mates, why they belong to the same words. And the answer is the second quote: whenever 2 possible individuals are spatio-temporally related, they are word mates. If there is any distance between them, be it great or small, spatial or temporal, they are parts of one single word. In short, W is a possible word when it is a maximal connected object. It's difficult to imagine something that is more objectivistic notion of word, which in a way or another, you find similar version, even Locke, but in a very different language. Now, let us contrast it with Husserl correlative account. I skip the German because I spare you my awful German accent. So a real word necessarily belongs as an intentional correlate to a real ego or to its real stream of consciousness. So a word is what it is only as a counterpart of an experiencing ego. Everything contained is either directly experienced or belongs to the determinable horizon of indeterminacy of the actual experience. This is one of the many statements of transcendental idealism. Of course, the experiencing ego actually, when it's explored more in detail, will turn out to be a community of transcendental subjects, and that's how the story works. Now, we will work out some consequences of this contrast in which, on the one hand, the word is treated as this kind of thing that is there, and then you can make some kind of variation, imagine different structure of this word, and the other of an open community of transcendental consciousness. Now, from the phenomenological point of view, exploring possible words amounts to exploring possible correlates, of the life of consciousness, which is itself necessarily involved in the imaginative variation. Just as in the case of objectivistic possible word theories. Are you hearing me, by the way? Can please somebody confirm that you are hearing me?
Yes, we are. We're just all on
okay. Great. Thank you. I was just just as in the case of the objectivistic possible word theories, we can imagine correlates of consciousness that differ in more or less interesting ways from our world. Obviously, I spare you with the usual trivial examples. They can be trivial, or they can be, of course, different laws of nature, different history, different cultural words. They can differ in many ways. Here I will focus on imagined variations of the actual world that go in the direction of dismantling the objectivity of the actual world. Yet I will stop quite far away from Husserl's famed scenario of the annihilation of the world, in that I will not remove the possibility of at least minimally coherent intersubjective experience as of an embodied perceptual life. So I will imagine possible life words in the real sense of the word. Now, imagining alternative life words with respect to our own, there are different ways in which we can concoct imagined variants of the actual word. The most interesting way is to foreground the two ontological regions, nature and spirit, and their interrelations. So there is a sense in which varying the personal life world, that is the spirit and its environment, determines also a correlative variation of nature and of the science thereof. Obviously, even if imagine a different cultural history, something trivially has to change in the world because the position of the body of human beings will be different. But not only that, more interestingly, a valid science, if a valid science is a component of this different cultural world, then that would carry with it also a different nature. And there is a lot of consideration that I'm here squeezing into lines about how, according to Husserl, in the end, you can recover the entire natural world from within the personalistic attitude. The fairly simple examples derive from imagining a personal social world correlated to a nature that is significantly different from ours, obviously, or conversely, a different personal world correlated to the actually existing nature. But this is not really very interesting, because moving to possible semi-life worlds is what I want to do, as the idea is not to conceive another possible world that admits the possibility of endless objectivation, but that contains different scientific but contains different scientific truth, like a world in which the laws of nature are different, but to consider worlds that lack one or more layers of scientific truth and determination. Now, Quentin Meillassoux has made a few suggestions in his beautiful text, Metaphysique et Fiction, Le Monde hors science, which is a nice book, actually, which I like more than the other. And there is some quasi-eidetic analysis there, and also the application to hello?
Somebody has unmuted themselves, but I didn't think it had to do with you directly, Emiliano.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So why is phenomenology particularly well equipped to address this theme? Is that it details the condition of possibility for the being of an objective world at all. Let's see. Well, here the foray really begins in a sense that I introduce a number of types of words that have different features with respect to the possibility of their objective determination, in a sense. So a G word is a word whose causal structure can be captured by exact physical laws. The G stands for what Husserl in the Crisis called the hypothesis guiding Galileo's mathematization of nature, in its material stratum, a G word is a complete, fully objectifiable word. So it's deserves to be called G because with G words, because Husserl is quite explicit there that the idea that there is at all a possibility for nature to be mathematized is at bottom that. It's a very important feature. It's not something on which there is a metaphysical proof that we know. That would be precisely the modern way of doing things. It is basically, as he says, an hypothesis that admits only of an infinite verification. It is the history of science itself, that it is this verification. So for what we know, in a sense, we live in a G words because the Galileo hypothesis seems to be proved. It's not clear to me whether such a word would also be what I would call an R word, which I take a kind of jest from Leopold von Ranke's famed dictum "Wie eigentlich gewesen ist," which is always quoted when people speak about possibility of objective knowledge of history, the ideal of an objective knowledge of history, which captures the idea that there is of there being a truth in itself also for the world of spirit. So it's not entirely obvious what the two are, but I will not explore this problem. It is just a question. To be sure, if both conditions hold, sorry for the many spelling mistakes, we would we would live in an E word. What is an E word? That is one in which it is possible to pursue episteme, in the Greek sense, epistemic, scientific, rigorous knowledge about the world, over and above the doxastic layer of the life word. So if there is this possibility, which is, as we hope we do now, we would live in a world that admits of an objective determination, and that would deserve to be called an epistemic word, so to speak. And there is, again, no guarantee a priori that a life word is an epistemic word, that scientific life is there, that a scientific truth is there. Now, a D word would instead be a correlate of consciousness that is only well behaved enough as to consist in an intersubjective environment in which at least subjective relative truths are possible. So a word in which there is a certain consensus, but there is not really what we would call objective knowledge of reality. That there are only truths that are shareable to a limited extent in a contextual way between groups of people. And of course, here you would want many examples of this, but that's precisely why one would need to have the time to develop the details of constitutional theory, and I will do it only in one or two cases later. So a very simple phenomenological result, D word need not to be an E word, and E word might necessarily be also a D word. What does it mean? That a doxastic word need not to be an epistemic word. For what I said, you can imagine a word that does not admit of an objective scientific determination, and we will shortly see an example. And instead, and that's not so trivial when you think about the objectivist point of view, an epistemic word must necessarily be also a doxastic word. So what it means that a true word, objective in itself, that is the aim of scientific knowledge, can exist at all only if it is brought about, if it appears, if it is the kernel, so to speak, of a word that is given in subjective relative experience. And that's the great thesis of Husserl's crisis, basically. Because out of eidetic necessity, of that objective truth can appear only on the basis of pre-scientific subjective relative truth. So in a sense, a word cannot just be as form of elementary particles plus a purely theoretical and disembodied subjectivity studying it, let alone simply as form of elementary particles. So these are all consequences of this different approach, which is not objectivistic. A D word would deserve, a D word that is not an E word, would deserve to be called a naked or hollow. Why? Why naked is just a reference to the idea that according to Husserl, truth is an idea implied, is a garb of ideas thrown onto the life word. So it would be a word in which you cannot do that, and therefore you cannot cast this garb of ideas. And hollow, I like it more because the idea is that the perceptual world would not really have a true inside, in a sense. It wouldn't, because it wouldn't be possible to say that this object that I'm touching and that I am experiencing with his secondary qualities actually has in itself true primary qualities. You wouldn't be allowed to say that. They wouldn't exist. They wouldn't exist. So the word would exist only as correlates of possible subjects, and there would be only limited intersubjective agreement. Now, if then you make a little step forward in this foray, you would see that the G word, as in the words of Husserl himself, has two layers. So the stuff before, you don't find it there, it's just an elaboration. Here I come to a quote, in the sense that in a very interesting way, Husserl distinguishes two layers of scientific truth that are one based on the other. So I don't read this long quotation because otherwise we are probably at the end of the talk. So the point is quite simple. Basically, one thing is to have a nature that is morphologically ordered, so with things that belong to types, in such a way that even a morphological science like botany, for instance, is possible. And another thing is, in addition to this, to have a word which admits also an exact determination according to mathematical physics and laws. Now, these two are eidetically separated for Husserl. So that's why in his famous example of the destruction of the word, he removes first one layer and then the other. And so here you have two different levels, one based on the other, and you can dismantle them separately, which basically would mean that the G word, a well-behaved Galileo word, has these two layers, the morphological and the nomological. It is impossible to imagine the collapse of the nomological structure of imagining the collapse of its morphological order, but not vice versa. The G word is necessarily an M word, so it's necessarily morphologically stable, but not vice versa. A further question is how to conceive a life word that it is so unstable as to make impossible morphological sciences too, and yet stable enough to host unstable subjective, relative, and yet shareable truth. The question, in other terms, is how to build a doxastic word, a purely doxastic word, that is not also morphologically, scientifically cognizable. And here we get a little bit to a limiting case that in order to answer, we need to look at the conditions of possibility of morphological stability. And here, this is one of the resources that in this little survey I want to at least mobilize, which is the one of normality. Normality, which is a fundamental phenomenological concept. And here we have that normality in phenomenology is as a transcendental function, because it sets the rules to ask you deviation from normality from the
ho chiamato Giovanni su Skype. Sì.
Okay.
Sì.
Again, if everybody could please mute the microphones, thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah, Emiliano, everything's okay. Just somebody, I think, popped in and microphone.
Okay. So from the constitution of the object, a stable world of perception requires what Husserl called an orthoaesthetic perceptual life. Means what? Well, its best thing is to imagine an example. If I start seeing everything yellows, it is because the causal structure of the world, what Husserl called the conditionality between the sense data and the live, all these different levels are coherent and well-behaved and in such a way that I can say, well, look, it's true that I am seeing everything yellow, but just because I ingested some santonin, like a drug, to go back to Husserl's own example, and it's not that everything has turned yellow. So that event, the change of color in the object, is eschewed from the constitution of the object itself. It doesn't belong, it doesn't contribute to the constitution of the object. Now, if you make this conditional structure collapse in such a way that basically there is no stable normality, then, well, to an extent, you destroy everything. But that's even from the point of view of genetic phenomenology, it's really important because it's a total breakdown of perception in such a way the morphological units would become so fluctuating. You wouldn't be able to say that this, what happens there, wouldn't distinguish whether it's a real change in the word or it is a change in perception. There would be no matter of fact about that. And in this case, we would still have empirical types that are vague to a certain extent, but you wouldn't be able even to build a morphological science. So if this claim is correct, this would be a minimal doxastic word, but it would be nevertheless a possibility as a correlate of consciousness that deserves to be explored in detail for many reasons. Let us mention at the end, because I'm done, that similar analysis must be developed not only for the social world, but also for the possible axiological and practical words, which completely different questions, about which completely different questions arise. And here is the conclusion where there is really not much to conclude, but from a phenomenological standpoint, the problem of possible words is neither accessory nor trivial. What is possible in general from a phenomenological point of view? Well, what does not contradict any a priori truth? Such system is to the possible words what an instrument is to the different musical pieces you can play on it, if you want. But in contrast with an objectivistic conception of possible words, in this case, the range of accepted a priori truth is much wider and fundamentally richer in nature. On the objective side, we find all formal and objective material a priori truth, and on the subjective side, we find likewise material phenomenological eidetic truth, the one that spells out the very essence of the correlation between consciousness and reality. Now, it is this essence of correlation between consciousness and reality that sets limits to what counts as a possible word, and it's quite interesting there. For this reason, what counts as a possible word for a phenomenology, can come in conjunction with a detailed and ideally complete theory of transcendental constitution only. And so it's really it's a fundamental thing. Finally, the phenomenological approach, and that's what I tried to prove here, has the advantage to give a detailed account of the different possible correlates of the life of consciousness as possible semi-words, and to establish the correct hierarchical relation between them as implied by the structures of manifestation of reality. And so this is the end of this very short piece of propaganda for transcendental phenomenology. Thank you.